All right, Hotep, everybody. Hey, this is Michael Imhotep, founder of the African History Network and host of the African History Network show. It is Sunday, May 18th, 2025, and we are here for a special edition of the African History Network show. And my guest is none other than esteemed scholar and historian, my brother, your brother, Professor Kaba Kamene. Hotep, brother, how you doing tonight?
Hotep to my brother Imhotep. I am doing excellent, and Hotep and peace to the family that's tuned in.
Absolutely. Well, look, we're going to talk about Pan-Africanism or perish. Pan-Africanism or perish. We'll talk about African Liberation Day. You know, African Liberation Day is coming up May 25th, 2025. Professor Kaba Kamene is going to be right here in Detroit to celebrate African Liberation Day. And we're going to talk about the 100th birthday celebration of El Hajj Malik El Shabazz, Malcolm X, May 19th, 2025. We know he was born May 19th, 1925 in Omaha, Nebraska. There are going to be celebrations all across the country, including in Detroit. And Professor Kaba, in addition to being in documentaries like Hidden Colors and Elementary Genocide and the Black Friday series, and he and I, we're in the Elementary Genocide and Black Friday series also together. In addition to that, he is also a former Black Studies professor at State University of New York, New Paltz, and he also taught a class on the history of Malcolm X. So this is a perfect brother to discuss these topics. All right, Professor Kaba. So you're going to be here in Detroit on Friday, May 23rd at the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History for the African Liberation Day celebration that the Detroit African Liberation Day organization is putting on. And your topic is Pan-Africanism or perish. Pan-Africanism on perish. They're also doing a tribute to the great Grandmaster Scholar Warrior, Dr. John Henrik Clarke. So explain to us, what is Pan-Africanism?
You know, it's interesting. First, my brother Imhotep, I thank you for inviting me to be on your program.
Oh,
and
absolutely.
to be able to speak to your community and to, reconnect with you.
Again.
Because we have worked on several occasions together in the past.
Yeah.
There was a time we had a weekly show together.
Yeah, on Blog Talk Radio. Absolutely.
That is it.
Yeah, the Per Ankh Hour. Yeah.
That's it.
And I first interviewed you in 2010, the year I launched the African History Network show. Go ahead.
Okay. Yes, man. So we go back that far.
Yes.
And man, I just congratulate you on all your great successes in building your audience and getting the word out here for our people to understand. So first, I stand there to thank you for this opportunity.
Oh, thanks. Thanks for coming on.
No doubt, brother, man. The concept, really, Pan-African or perish, was something that I heard Professor John Henrik Clarke speak of frequently.
Mm-hmm.
And as I have said in the past, I looked at Professor John Henrik Clarke as my Jegna, as that individual that brought me through as an apprentice to the work that I was doing in terms of educating our children here in New York City. The concept of Pan-African or perish is basically this. We as an African people are not only on the continent, but throughout the diaspora, every aspect of where we are in the world. The Hawaiian Islands, Polynesia, Micronesia, Australia, in Europe, in UK, and in Holland, and in Germany, and in France. So we're all over the world. And so this concept of Pan-Africanism or perish is the idea that Professor Clarke attempted to get us to understand that we must work together to move forward. And I've often said that wherever an African is, Africa is.
Right.
And wherever Africa is, I'm home. So wherever I've traveled, whatever I have done, I've always looked at those ties that bind us. And one of the very interesting things that has happened over time now is the fact that there is a discussion amongst us as a people as it relates to who we are as a people.
Yes.
And I know that this concept, and see, my brother Imhotep, you've been in this long enough to know, we've been in this long enough to know that we have got situations that we have to solve.
Correct.
We have challenges, and everybody would like to brush it under the rug. But I'm at the age now where I realize we got to pull that rug back
Mm-hmm.
and view our strengths and those areas that need to be strengthened. And there's a term that is being used now, and I know that everybody has their own view towards it. But I agree with the term, and I think it's a term that we need to have, and that is foundational Black American or foundational African American,
Mm-hmm.
however we want to phrase it. And the reason why that becomes a very important term is because, as you know, Elon Musk is from South Africa. He is also an American citizen.
Right.
He legally is considered an African American. I've had students in college in New Paltz whose parents were in Africa, one way or another. And my student was born in Africa. And then they came back home to America where their parents were from. My student was an African American. And not only was my student an African American, but she was able to get a scholarship as an African American. And so the term African American is a very loose term now in America. And it becomes important that for legacy purposes, my good brother, my elder brother, Professor James Smalls, and I have spoken about this on several occasions. And the idea is that to be a foundational African American, to be a foundational Black American, whatever you want to term it, there has to be a legacy. Elon Musk does not have ancestry that
Correct.
worked on the plantations of America. President Barack Obama
Mm-hmm.
does not have ancestors that worked on the plantations in the United States. And so it becomes important that those Africans who have legacy and lineage from the colonies or in America in general, there has to be a certain identification and a legacy that we have. And the term is foundational African American. So that although it's controversial, we have to understand we have brothers and sisters that are from Brazil.
Right.
They are of African descent. They come to America, become a citizen. They're good people. They're our brothers and sisters. But when you ask them where they're from Brazil.
Mm-hmm.
You have the same thing with all of the islands of the Caribbean. You have Mexico. You have Britain. When you ask them where they're from, they will tell you the country that they're from. What happens when you ask a foundational African American, where are you from? So the identification has to be very clear, and it has to be legacy bound. I have family. My daddy is from Alabama. My mother is from Boston, Massachusetts. I have ancestry that worked on the plantations. And when it's time for them to cut that check, America owes my ancestors a check. And so if you're from Brazil, Portugal owes you a check. If you are from Jamaica, Trinidad, Ghana, England owes you a check. If you're from Haiti, Martinique, Mali, France owes you a check. And so, and if you're from Puerto Rico, República Dominicana, Cuba, Spain owes you a check. And so from the very beginning, I think, Brother Imhotep, we have to be clear on legacy.
Okay.
And that the term African American now includes everybody of African descent that is an American citizen. But that does not mean that you have a legacy that goes back to the plantations of the United States or the 13 colonies.
What is the origin, since you took it in this direction? What's the origin of the term African American?
Well, the term African American for me comes from the fact, going back to Malcolm and our celebration of this brother's centennial birthday tomorrow.
Sure.
The idea is that I've always chosen to identify with the land. Now, whether we called it Africa or Kibulan, I'm not getting involved in that, because the reality of it is that we call the continent Africa. So let's start with what we know and what's there. Most people, if not all people, consider that continent, that huge continent, to me the largest continent, Africa.
Right.
So the term African American comes from a very early stage, prior to the immigration laws being broken down, where Malcolm said we must identify with land. And so it becomes important that African American is someone of African descent that is an American citizen. So that's how I see the African American term. So you have people from all around the world who, again, it's important to understand that when the civil rights laws broke down in 64, 65, following that, the immigration laws broke down.
Sure.
And so this is where we get everybody from around the world coming to America. And so it becomes important that wherever you have come from around the world, in the realization that it is the stealing of the land from the indigenous people, who many of them were Black, stealing the land from indigenous people, and then stealing people from Africa to bring them here to work. It is in that combined understanding that African people built the economy of America. And so that when you are in a place where you may not be able to get the benefit that you would like for you and your family, which you have every right, and you come to America, what's important to understand is that the benefits you receive through the blood, the sweat, and the tears, and the life of the foundational African American. Whatever you may do in America, whatever job you may have, you have because of the Africans that worked on the plantation that created the economic system of America in the first place.
Right. Okay.
Now,
so go ahead.
I was just going to end by saying, with that in mind, I still see, if you are of African descent, wherever you are from on the planet, you're my family.
Absolutely. That's Pan-African. That's an aspect of Pan-Africanism.
Yes.
And we'll get into, because I want to contextualize Pan-Africanism and give some a working definition of it as well. So Professor James Small is one of my teachers as well, as you are. Professor James Small says, I'm an African American. African is my race. America is my geopolitical place. At some point, African American got the definition got broadened. I would argue because we did not control the narrative. And it got broadened to include Europeans, descendants of invaders coming to this country, because they're not of African ancestry. They may have been in Africa, descendants of the Dutch who invaded in 1652, coming from the Dutch East India Company, but they're not of African ancestry. But just for the point of historical context, the term African American dates back to 1782 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I encourage people to read this article. I've dealt with this in my lectures. I talk about this in my online history classes. This is one of the articles that deals with this. This is from the New York Times, April 21st, 2015. The term African American appears earlier than thought, and it talks about a book of sermons, and it was entitled, it was stated, written by the African American, okay, and is referring to somebody of African descent. Now, also it's important to note that the term Afro-American dates back to the 1830s, okay, and so these are very old terms, and you know this, Professor Kaba, because you've been teaching this history longer than me. These are very old terms. These are not new terms. Sometimes they have a different slant on the interpretation depending upon the generation that's using the term. But contrary to popular belief, and I know you know better than this, but I hear people say this, contrary to popular belief, Reverend Jesse Jackson did not create the term African American in 1988, 1989. He reintroduced the term. Okay, Malcolm X in the Battle of the Bullet, he used the term African American. Okay, and I show this. It's in Malcolm's speech, the Battle of the Bullet, the one he did in Cleveland, Ohio. So that was April 3rd, 1964, the Battle of the Bullet. And I actually show this to people. There's a this right here. I'll bring up this just so people, just so we can have this historical context, and dispel a lot of these myths that I know you hear and I hear as well. Because the internet and social media can be a very valuable tool, or it can be a tool to disseminate misinformation and disinformation. It depends upon how you use it. It's like a gun. A gun can be a valuable tool to save your life, or it could be a tool to take away the lives of multiple people. Okay, so if we do this screen share, so this is from the book Malcolm X Speaks. And why isn't it bringing up the, why isn't it letting me share the screen? Okay, but this is from the book Malcolm X Speaks, and with prefatory notes by who's it? Prefatory notes by George Brightman. Okay, and this has a lot of speeches from the last few months of Malcolm's life. Okay, this is from, so this book right here, Malcolm X Speaks. This is the Battle of the Bullet. He delivered in Cleveland, Ohio. This was April 3rd, 1964, at Corey Methodist Church. And he says, right now in this country, if you and I, 22 million African Americans, that's what we are, Africans who are in America. But Malcolm used the term African Americans. And Professor Small has told me before, he said we were using the term African Americans in the 1960s. So depending upon which generation uses different terms, and their understanding of the history behind that term kind of sets the tone for how that term is used and understood for like that each generation. But yeah, I do agree that there's a difference, even though we're both Pan-Africanists, there's a difference between Africans from the diaspora and African Americans or Black Americans. We're all part of the Pan-African family, but they're different branches of that tree, so to speak. Okay, cutting the check is a whole nother thing, because we just had this discussion on Roland Martin Unfiltered on Friday, and part of the problem is our whole concept of quote unquote reparations is not really focused on repairing the damage that was done from a legacy of slavery, Jim Crow segregation, racism, redlining, housing discrimination, etc., because we haven't done a proper analysis of the harm that was inflicted. So the harm that was inflicted, gets reduced down to our ancestors worked for free for 246 years and did not get paid. Therefore, decades later, their descendants are owed 17 trillion, 27 trillion, things like this. My argument is, well, you have the structural inequities that exist today are the legacy of slavery. If we all got $1 million today or $5 million a day, white people will have it all back by this time next month. But the structural inequities created by laws and policies would still be in place, continue to inflict the harm, because you haven't done a systems analysis to determine the harm that was inflicted. So we have to have comprehensive reparations. Just cutting the check is not going to repair the damage. We're dealing with everything from housing disparities to health disparities to environmental racism, things like this. So we have to do a systems analysis on dealing with repairing the damage, but understanding that that the structural inequities that exist today are the legacy of slavery. So we got to study the laws and policies that were put in place that created the structural inequities and trace that back to slavery, Jim Crow segregation, the fall of Reconstruction, rewriting the state constitutions, imposing poll taxes, literacy tests, felony disenfranchisement laws, things of this nature. Okay, so when we talk about Pan-Africanism, right? Because Pan-Africanism sometimes can be a scary word for people. Sometimes it can be a confusing word for people. Sometimes people think Pan-Africanism, they can't be Christian and be Pan-Africanism. I have had people ask me, do I have to give up pork and stop chasing white women to be a Pan-Africanist? I said, you don't have to, but it would help. So explain to people, what is Pan-Africanism?
Well, you know, the other concept is, of course, being introduced to my brother Baba Heru.
Yes.
Who is the caretaker of the Shrine of Ptah here in New York.
Mm-hmm.
He has said that he doesn't care for the term Pan-African.
Okay.
Because it's Roman. And basically Pan means all.
Yeah, Greek, isn't that Greek? Pan is Greek.
Well, anything that's Roman is Greek.
Okay, all right.
You know, and anything that's Greek is African.
Okay, right.
Except it's an interpretation,
right,
of the original concept.
Mm-hmm.
But what our brother tells us is that Nebu Afrika, when you add a U to a word in Meduneter, it means plural. Like we add an S, makes things plural.
Like
when you add a U in Meduneter, the Kushite language that was brought into Kemet or Egypt, then that becomes plural. So Nebu, Neb means all, but Nebu means a cosmic all. It means all as it relates to we in our relationship to nature.
Right.
Af is a term that's used to represent matter or all things that have been concretized.
Okay.
Ra is the light, heat, and sound energy from the sun. And Ka is the spirit. Yes. So when Baba Heru introduces a term like Nebu Afrika, it comes from a universal cosmic concept where we are in league with nature, not just with human beings, but with nature. So that's another type of term we can use. But let's go back to the term Pan-African, which many people know, which basically means Pan-African is all Africans.
Right.
Which, and again, scientifically, I could go into another area with that concept of African because there is only one race on the planet.
Sure, the human race.
And that's the human race.
Right.
And that human race was conceived, born, nurtured, sustained, educated, technologized, and civilized in Africa, specifically the Twa and Mbuti Khoisan people of Central and Southern Africa.
Right.
When they got their show together, then they took it on the road and they peopled the planet. So the term Pan-African, from a certain perspective, applies to everybody. But in relationship to the social concept of what we're talking about, we are basically talking about Africans at home and abroad. What Marcus Garvey said, Africa for Africans at home and abroad. So the concept of Pan-African is a unified mutual benefit that will help all Africans wherever we are in the world.
Okay. Now, when you say Pan-Africanism refers to everybody, who is everybody?
Everybody is every human being.
Okay.
Your white folk too, Asian people. When you take it to the scientific, but we're dealing with social concepts.
Right. Right.
Just like when we talk about African American, there's a social context that we always must be sensitive to, because when you talk about how the internet takes advantage, and it can be a great thing and it can be a bad thing. Every tool is a weapon and every weapon is a tool. It's not what it is, it's how you use it.
Right.
And so we always have to be aware of the socialization of what it is that we're talking about, because we're living in a different type of world where the internet can take what is being said to a whole nother level.
Right.
But you see, in terms of the socialization of the world, we're dealing with melanated people who are of African descent.
Okay. And also, when I talked about the term African American, is important to understand that African American is an ethnic group. It's not a nationality. It's an ethnic group. Okay. So Now, when we look at in my lectures, a working definition that I give of Pan-Africanism comes from a book that I got in college called Pan-Africanism for Beginners by Sid Lemele, Lemelle. And Pan-Africanism is an ideology that African people around the world and throughout the diaspora should be united. It deals with social, cultural, political, economic, material, and spiritual aspects. And basically, Pan-Africanism teaches that the fate of African people worldwide is intertwined, and we share not only a common history but a common destiny. So what is your take on this, like, working definition of Pan-Africanism, to try to contextualize it and possibly introduce this concept to somebody that may not be familiar with it?
I think that's the concept itself.
Yes.
You know, just as you've explained it, just as we've spoken about it. See, again, going back to our brother Malcolm, he made everything very simple.
Yes.
I think that's what made him a genius.
Yeah, make it plain.
Make it plain. I've always believed that the greatest teachers take complex issues and make them simple.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that Western civilization have taken simple concepts and made them complex.
Right.
Because in order for them to be able to survive and control, they have got to confuse the issue so that nobody really is in tune with the unity. If you just take the 7 principles of Kwanzaa,
mm-hmm.
you're looking at Pan-Africanism.
Right.
The idea of unity, first and foremost, unity. And what's interesting about the days of Kwanzaa, despite the fact that they are spoken in Kiswahili, a language spoken in Kenya and in Tanganyika, along with that is the fact that those principles are not only important as it relates to us as a people, it relates to us as a human family. But the thing is, brother Imhotep, is that in order to have unity with each other, you have to have unity with yourself. And the first step in having unity with yourself is to love yourself.
Right.
And so unity being that first principle, if you can't get past unity, none of the other 6 are going to work. So first you have unity, and then you have self-determination. You determine for yourself what it is that you want for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And then after you have that, you have cooperative work and responsibility, because we all know as Africans worldwide what we have to do cooperatively to work and to have responsibility for what we do. Responsibility is 2 words, it's not one. Responsibility is the response to your ability. And then you have ujamaa, which is us working with each other as it relates to the economics of what it is that we have to do.
Right.
Okay, so that when you look at the principles and the ideas of what Kwanzaa tells us, that could be the concepts that we're looking at. Now you take Neely Fuller, and then you have the idea of creativity. You have the idea of having faith in yourself, and you have those 7 principles that outline. But then you take Neely Fuller's areas of those 9 areas, along with that other one.
9 areas of human activity.
Yes, the idea of, and I call it REL CEL WEP. It's an acronym that I use.
Yeah, economics, education, entertainment, labor law, politics,
yes.
Religion, sex, and war.
Start with, with the REL is religion. See, because I always like to make things so that people can remember. An acronym is REL CEL WEP, RELSELWEP. Religion, which is spirituality. So that no matter what religion you belong to, whether you're Christian, Muslim, Hebrew, Buddhist, as Black folk, we need to get together.
Right.
And find a way spiritually to be able to come forward with this new way of energizing us as a people. Then you have economics, where we have to begin to understand what economics really is. Echo comes from the Greek word, Roman word, Cushite word, oikos, O-I-K-O-S, which means home or environment, because the wealth to the original people of the planet was in your land. Your land was what you loved and loved you back. And as you loved the land loved you back, and it gave you everything you needed to be able to not just survive, but to thrive. So then you have labor. You know, and I think of Dr. Amos Wilson when he said a good organization solves its people's problems and meets its people's needs.
Right. Yep.
And the question becomes, why should our children respect us or honor us if every time they need something, they have to go to someone else for it? Why do they have to go to someone else for a summer job? Why do they have to go to someone else for an after-school job? We should be able to supply that job for our community. So they come to us as it relates to solving their problems and meeting their needs. Neely Fuller calls it sex. I tend to, because the way in which sex is looked upon, I tend to want to call it gender issues as it relates to relationships between Black men and Black women. We got to get that together.
Yeah,
that's the area of the psychologists, the social workers, and the psychiatrists. And then from there, you have the area where I am, which I believe is my lane, which is education. Then you have the idea of law. And what I encourage people to do who are in law school, brothers and sisters who are in law school, study Moorish law. Not just the law that you get in law school. And if you want to make one step forward, look at Black's Law's Dictionary.
Black's Law's Dictionary, yes.
Look at the Moorish law, because the Moorish law is very important, because the Moorish law touches on things that you may not be introduced to in the regular law school.
What is Moorish law? What is Moorish law? What do you call a Moorish law?
Moorish law is that law that goes back in time, that is established as it relates to the laws of Ma'at.
Okay.
See, as you can see what's going on here, this is no Ma'at. Their legal system, because of the nature of what you see happening, it's not based on Ma'at.
It's not based on truth, justice, righteousness, balance, harmony, order, and reciprocity. A lot of it is not,
And definitely not reciprocity, Brother Imhotep, because reciprocity is my favorite characteristic of Ma'at. And it is, you shall reap what you sow.
Right, karma, yep. You shall reap what you sow, yep.
You will get what you give. What goes around
comes around.
Okay. So when you think about that, you have to ask yourself, the way in which you conduct yourself in life, would you do what you do if you knew that everything you did out to someone else or something else was going to come back at you? Would you really do it? Because if you still would transgress against someone else or something else, knowing it's going to come back on you, that's a whole psychopathic situation you're going to have to deal with. You see, so that concept of law is what the Moorish law is based on. It's based on, it travels from the ancient Moorish laws that go into the ancient African laws that go into the universal laws of the cosmic universe. See, the cosmos don't act like this. The cosmos don't make exceptions to the rule. Just because you're this stature in life, it doesn't mean that you have a special law that applies to you. And this is an analysis of this is a story that was written in ancient Kemet. It's called The Eloquent Peasant. Or The Trials of Khnum Anoop. Where you can see that there's this baron that has wealth and that there's a worker who is considered to be less than. And that as they go through all of this process of what they're experiencing, the baron tricks the worker into having to give up his ownership of what he has. And they go to court, which tells you that no matter where you are in the station of life, amongst the Kush Kemetic people, you could bring anybody to court just because your stature in life, station in life, don't make you special. And so the worker expresses his idea of what happened. Long story short, his eloquence, the judges make him do it 9 times. And the last time, the Neset Biti, or the Pharaoh, is in the background listening.
Okay.
And that the Neset Biti, or the Pharaoh, because Neset Biti is what we call the Pharaoh, which means the one who has the right to rule, says that he was so eloquent in his presentation, the Medu Nefer, the good word, he spoke so well. What he literally did was that he gave the worker everything that the baron had, and he made the baron the worker for the once worker. So it goes to show that the first shall come. That's where they get the term, the first shall come last and the last shall come first. The trials of Kanu-Manoop, or the eloquent peasant, show the type of justice that came out of the universal cosmic mind. Is that no matter where you are in life, if you violate the laws of Ma'at, you are going to pay a price and you shall get what you give. So those laws of Ma'at is what I believe that the Moorish law is based on.
Okay. So when you talk about Kunu-Nup, you're talking about the ancient philosopher from ancient Kemet. Okay. Right? When you talking about Kunu-Nup?
Well, Kanu-Manoop is the worker himself.
Okay.
But it is the story of the trials of Kanu-Manoop that become that story of the philosopher, because he was so eloquent in his presentation of what he believed he had been transgressed against.
The story of Kunu-Nup. So that dates back to about 2040 BC, somewhere ancient 2040 BC. Because in the book, the Egyptian philosophers, Ancient African Voices from Imhotep to Akhenaten. Dr. Malefe Kete Asante.
Yes.
And I've interviewed Malefe is a friend of mine. I've interviewed him here on the show before. He talks about this. Excuse me. He talks about this. The Kunu-Nup story, 2040 BC. The story of an ordinary man who is confronted by the dilemma of what to do when a rich man steals his goods. In this story, Kunu-Nup challenges the rich man before the magistrates and eventually wins his case. The moral laws, i.e., the conquest of good over bad or righteousness over evil, are remarkably contemporary. So now, when you use the term Moorish, Moorish, and you talk about Moorish laws, how does Moorish laws relate to this ancient story coming from ancient Kemet, ancient Egypt? Kemet meaning one of the original names for Egypt, meaning land of the blacks, or the black land.
When we look at the North Africans who would go into Europe,
and Iberian Peninsula, 711 AD, 8th century.
Exactly. Then those individuals, when they came, they, as a tradition, there was such a lot. And see, this is something else that we have to study as we move through. Dr. Sheikh Anta Diop, in chapter 9 of his book, Myth or Reality, talks about the peopling of West Africa from the Nile Valley. One of the things that's left out in our understanding of the relationships, of the intra-relationships of Africans on the continent, is that there was lively trade going on for thousands of years.
From the Nile Valley region of Africa into West Africa. We migrated, we
back and forth, and
back
also
and forth.
West Africa on East Africa.
Yes.
You see, we have this mindset because of the nature of Indo-Europeans coming into Egypt, that being their entry point into Africa. We get the impression that everything great and good only happened in East Africa, particularly in Kush Kemet. That's not true. This is something else that Dr. Clark used to always say. West Africa was kicking back in the day. There's a city known as Eredu, Eredo, in West Africa, that had a civilization that had a 400 square mile city, and it was walled in. And so the great civilizations, when you go into Southern Africa, from Namibia, you can go to Botswana, stone monuments. You can go to Southern Africa and you have the Adams calendar that some people are dating going back 150,000 to 200,000. I don't want to get caught up in dates.
I know you say that. Don't get caught up in dates.
Future generations will become accurate. I tell people I know I'm right, but I don't think I'm accurate, because future generations will perfect the work that we lay down for them.
Right.
Just like Dr. David Imhotep was able to take the work of Dr. Ivan van Sertima to the next level.
Yes.
And just like the scholars of today take Dr. Sheikh Anta Diop's work or Dr. Ben's work or any of the other scholars to the next level. And I would assume that the same will happen with us. Dr. Ben told me that he was only scratching the scratch of the surface.
Dr. Yosef Ben Yakinen, yes.
Yes. So it's important, Brother Imhotep, and to the family, that we don't necessarily think that what we're saying is carved in stone.
Right.
That there's more accuracy to come. However, there is evidence of calendars in Southern Africa that date back a very long ways. It's called the Adams calendar, not to mention the Muratunga, which is another calendar. So we understand how long and how old our people are. So that when I deal with the term Moorish law, I'm dealing with groups of peoples of Africa that have studied the ancient civilizations of Africa, East, West, Central, South, and North. Mm-hmm. And they brought that which would become what we today call Western civilization. I give them the term Moors because that's the term that's being used now with regard to the great noble Drew Ali.
Okay.
Who popularized the term back in the early 1900s.
Okay.
And that they
Moorish Science Temple of America.
Exactly.
Yeah, Noble Drew Ali, Moorish Science Temple of America. Okay, so point of reference. I was looking for my copy of The First Americans Were Africans, Documented Evidence by our ancestor, Dr. David Imhotep, who was a personal friend of mine, and I interviewed him here on the African History Network show probably about 13 times. We know he passed away a couple of years ago. I think it was 2023, late 2023, he passed away. So point of reference, Nile Valley Contributions to Civilization by our friend Tony Browder. And I've had Tony here on the show a number of times. One of the best books dealing with African history and ancient Kemet. You don't have to have a PhD in African American history or Egyptology to be able to understand this. Then Golden Age of the Moor by Dr. Ivan van Sertima, who you just mentioned. And it has essays in here from Runoko Rashidi, who's an ancestor, Dr. Jose Pimenta Bay, who's one of the baddest scholars on the history of the Moors. And when I first started communicating with you in 2010, you told me that Dr. Jose Pimenta Bay is the man. Okay,
yes.
Dealing with the Moors. That brother. Oh, and he was one of my first interviews also. I interviewed him back in 2010. And he was teaching at Berea College in Kentucky. He was at Temple University in Philadelphia. He was there with Dr. Malefic Asante. And then I think he still may be at Berea College in Kentucky. But that brother, you know, I saw some of his lectures back in the 90s from Transatlantic Productions. I saw them on YouTube dealing with the decline of Moorish power in Spain, things like this. And I saw your fantastic lecture from the 90s, the history of the Moors in Spain. I saw that on YouTube. That's how I first found out about you. Okay. I saw that video, man. That video blew my mind. So then I started, and I first really heard about the Moors from Dr. Yosef Ben Yakinen back in the 90s when I was in college, from him, as well as Dr. Khalid Al-Mansour, who wrote a book that came out around 94 called Betrayal by Any Other Name. And he talks about the Moors in there, in the Umayyad dynasty and different things of this nature. Okay, so when you come here to Detroit, you're going to be here in Detroit Friday, May 23rd at the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History, 315 East Warren Avenue, for the African Liberation Day celebration that begins at 6 p.m. And you are talking about Pan-Africanism or perish. Pan-Africanism or perish. Why that topic, and why is either we adopt and practice Pan-Africanism or we will perish?
Well, I believe it goes back to the principles of Kwanzaa.
Okay.
Okay, cool. Working together as a people, realizing that there are ties that bind us. We have to get to this point right now.
Okay.
Where we're working together. Period. Let's make it simple and plain. And there are battles going on now. There are discussions going on now, and I know it's controversial as it relates to and I've done interviews in UK on this subject.
Okay.
Because there's a very strong rebuttal to many people who are claiming to be foundational Black Americans, foundational African Americans, however you want to call yourself. And there are people who have contacted me after I did those interviews. There are people contact me who were Nigerian.
Okay.
And they told me that when they're coming to America, they're told to stay away from Black Americans.
Sure.
That you go into drugs or you go into crime and they're not good. They separate us. And so there are some that come to this country with preconceived notions of us as a people, not understanding.
Right. Now, who tells them to stay away from us?
They go to meetings, like before they leave, they go to meetings. They go to workshops, how to become American citizens.
How to assimilate.
How to assimilate, exactly. And in those, they talk about those issues.
Right.
And now, I've had folk from Nigeria say they've been in those workshops.
Yes.
And that they've been told to stay away from us, that we're not a good people.
Right.
And they don't even really tell the true history of us as a people. So that they come with preconceived notions. The same thing goes, and they did the same thing to me when I was going to Jamaica. They told me to put one place you don't want to go is Trenchtown. When they told me that, brother Imhotep, that was the first place I wanted to go.
Bob Marley talks about Trenchtown.
That's right. That's right. Music, it's Trenchtown, man, and a Trenchtown rock.
Right.
And that was the first place I wanted to go. So they teach us to stay. And when I went there, brother Imhotep, I got to Trenchtown, and what I found remarkable is I grew up in a project in New York.
Okay.
And what I found remarkable is that the only difference between Trenchtown and the neighborhood where I grew up, the Amsterdam projects, right across the street from Lincoln Center, was the fact that in Trenchtown, there's dirt roads and the buildings are 3-story. In the project I grew up, it's concrete and there's 6 stories and some have 13 stories. So that was the only difference. Right. And so when I pulled up into Trenchtown, I was wondering, well, when are you going to take me to Trenchtown? And we were in Trenchtown.
Right.
And I was just about to say, wow, this looked like the neighborhood I grew up in. So they actively.
Sure.
And I believe what we have to do is we have to counter that by either having workshops in the country where they're coming from that tell them our story, or have workshops here in the United States once they get here to explain to them who we are and welcome them in terms of what's going to happen, because they're coming to the country for the benefits that African Americans, foundational African Americans, have built.
Right. So the reason why I asked that question is a couple of things. This is something that I consistently say, and I've said this on the African History Network show for years. I say this in my lectures. The same people who teach African people to hate African Americans or continental Africans or those coming from the Caribbean to hate African Americans, to stay away from us, are basically the same people who teach African Americans to hate ourselves.
That's right.
So this is a divide and conquer that's been going on for decades. And one of the mediums that's used to do this is the entertainment industry that exports negative, stereotypical images of African Americans and projects it around the world. Okay, like negative corporate controlled hip hop, not all of hip hop, but negative corporate controlled hip hop that perpetuates stereotypes, that shows dehumanizing images of us and projects this all around the world. That becomes the caricature, those negative images, the murderers and the drug dealers and the thieves and the robbers and those walking around grabbing their crotch and dehumanizing themselves. That becomes a living caricature of of African Americans. Okay, so and then the other thing here, so you have this divide and conquer and understanding controlling images. And Dr. Leonard Jeffries, who we both know, and Dr. Jeffries is one of my teachers, he said whoever controls the images controls the self-esteem, the self-development, the self-worth of the people. And then I remember I went to Chicago probably about 10 years ago now, and I was there for a lecture, and I ran into some people that listened to the African History Network show, and they were saying that they were going to come to Detroit, but they heard in Detroit at that time it was under I think at that time Mayor Duggan may have been mayor, but I can't remember. But it was a period of time where the city of Detroit was going through an economic turmoil, and some of the police departments, they were, I think, shutting them down early. It's like not all the police departments, but some of them, something like that. And they heard what they were telling me was they were going to come to Detroit, but they heard that there were periods of time where all the police departments were shut down, like during the nighttime, something like that. There was a period of time where all the police departments were shut down, and I was saying, no, that's not it. And then we were telling them, well, we were told not to go on the south side of Chicago. And they were telling us they're from Chicago. They was like, no, they're places you could go. You're going to be all right. So these are two groups of African Americans operating based upon stereotypes that we heard in the largely white controlled media to cause us to be scared of each other.
That's right.
Okay. All right.
That's right.
Yeah.
And also in that, like I remember I saw an interview where there was a brother from the continent.
Mm-hmm.
And he said that when he would go into a neighborhood to pick his cab fares, and there were black people, that he would be scared.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if just looking at a black person frightens you. How do you feel when you look in the mirror?
Right.
Are you afraid of who you see? And you know, this is what Malcolm again told us. He said, who taught you to hate the width of your nose, the color of your skin, the texture of your hair? Who taught you that? You didn't pick that up in Africa.
Mm-hmm.
So who taught you that?
Right.
And so this is why we say the first step in unity is self-love. You have to unite with yourself, so that when I look and I'm being approached by 8 young teenage brothers, how many times when I taught middle school did I have that happen?
Right.
I had young brothers around me all the time that were walking towards me, same brothers I see in the street. So there isn't an element of fear that comes up. And so it becomes important that and not only that, but I grew up as a young black man.
Right.
And so we all know what it's like. And we all know what it's like to hang with our buddies and our friends and walk in the street. And so the first step, brother, is self-love, to love ourselves. And when we love ourselves, we can love someone else. You cannot love someone else if you don't love yourself. You might have an emotion for them, but it's not love.
Okay.
You have to love yourself. You have to love the texture of your hair, the width of your nose, the size of your lip, because the creator who you are, the creator having a human experience, don't make mistakes.
Right.
And how you were born to look was how the creator wanted to look. And so you got to love how the creator looks. Right. And doing that comes other things.
Right. And also, for those that don't know, you taught 31 years in the New York City public school system,
Yes.
New York City Department of Education. You taught pre-K through 12th grade. Okay. So you taught all different grade levels.
And every subject.
And every subject as well. Okay.
And I taught college for 14 years.
Right. College for 14 years.
So I've been with our community on all of their emotional levels.
Right.
And I've watched the system and what the system does.
Right.
And I've dedicated my life. I tell people I'm the spook who sat by the classroom door.
Okay.
I studied the system in order to come back into the community, such as coming to the Charles Wright, and describe to them, because I was in and I was based in the Bronx, South Central Bronx. And in the South Central Bronx, I was there from 1979 until 2009.
Right.
And I watched the Spanish-speaking community, the majority Spanish-speaking community in South Central Bronx when I was there were from Puerto Rico. By the time I retired, the great majority were from the Dominican Republic.
Okay.
I was there when I watched brothers and sisters from Nigeria, Guinea-Bissau, Ghana come to District 9. I watched buildings that were once just buildings become mosques because of brothers and sisters from Africa. So I dealt with us, and in my district, when I was an administrator, we had 69 different language groups.
Wow.
Okay. And Mandy was one of them.
Okay. Mandy,
and I was able
West
to fight
Africa.
for a teacher who taught Mandy.
Okay.
Because the law said if you have 10 students in any school that are a particular language group that is not English, you have a right to have somebody that teach in that language. And I found a school that had about 15 Mande students. And we were able to, so that what I'm saying is I watched Pan-Africanism or Nebu Afrika at its best.
Right.
I watched, when we had open school night. It is true, and I'm going to use a family from Ghana. It is tradition that when they go to open school night, the family comes. The father comes, the mother comes, even the grandmother might come, and the children will come. And what you do is you set up the seats that will be in front of the teacher. It is the father that speaks. The father has a chair in front of the desk. The mother, if the grandmother comes, and the children sit behind the father. This is the culture. This is the custom.
Now, which culture is this?
I'm speaking specifically of Ghana.
Okay.
Okay. And if you wanted a language group, I'd say Twi.
Okay.
Okay. Many students spoke Twi, and many from Ghana, South Central Bronx. I'm talking about getting up into the mid to higher 90s. Immigration from the continent started to flourish, and where they came was 116th Street in Harlem in Manhattan, or they came to South Central Bronx. Some went to Brooklyn, but I'm talking about the group that came to the Bronx, probably because of family. Family came first, they invited other family members, and that's how it started to happen. The point that I'm making is that the culture is that the father and I, as teacher, would interact with each other.
Okay.
The female teachers of European descent didn't like that. They wanted them, they would move the mother's seat next to the father and didn't understand why the mother would put the chair back.
Okay. Why did the mother put the chair back?
Because culturally speaking, it's the father that speaks to the teacher.
Right.
That's the culture. Whether it's changed now, because I've been out for 16 years.
Right.
Whether it's changed now is a whole nother story. I'm talking about when I was first there with the first groups coming.
Okay.
Where everybody was first generation American. Not just the father and mother, but the children
too. Right.
This was the culture. So I've seen up close. I also had to go down to the lunchroom and tell them, because a lot of the food that's prepared in the lunch in the New York City system got pork in it.
Okay.
The butter that you put on your pancakes in the morning, could have pork fat in it.
Okay.
So that my exposure to watching what was going on, Pan-Africanism at its best, and the families just loved me, because when they would come in, like if a family from Nigeria came in and I knew they were Nigerian, I would say Shedadani, Shealafiani. And boy, their face would brighten up. And when they left, I'd say Odabo, which means goodbye.
Goodbye. Yep.
And so my relationship, man, they used to bring luncheon to me. They used to come in and talk to me. The fathers sometimes would just have conversation about culture, where they come from. and things like that, because we opened the door
Right.
for that. And language is the doorway to culture.
Okay.
If a parent from Ghana, medase,
Right. That's it.
medase for coming, and so the point that I'm making more than anything else is in Pan-Africanism, I believe that knowing what they go through, and somebody put up, which I appreciate, when we were talking about who makes these workshops, it's the immigration officials.
Immigration officials, yeah.
Okay, so thank you for sharing that.
Immigration.
Because that makes it more specific as to who's telling them to stay away from us.
Right.
And so what I did as an educator is I made it so that I used to have students from various parts of the continent, particularly West Africa, that would come in, and like I would, and if they had grandma living with them, I would say, invite your grandmother to come in and tell stories about what it was like when she was your age. And I would get the okay for grandma to come in, and she would come, and she would just tell stories when she was growing up and about what happened in school when she was there and about how things happened in the community. And, some of the students would tell me, I heard my grandmother tell stories. She never tells us at home. We found out so much about. So my first thing is I made the invitation to make it happen. I wanted to negate the stories that they told you about us. I wanted you to be welcomed into the classroom. I wanted you to see what was going on in the classroom, how the school was set up. I used to have the librarian come in and do tours of the library so that the community would see. That was the first, and I would always be there. We have to make that. Some people feel a certain way. I don't, because I know it's Pan-African or perish. Ain't no one group of us, no matter what our impact has been, no one group is going to get out alone by themselves.
We're
either going to stand together or we're going to fall apart.
So, and this is something that Dr. John Henrik Clarke taught as well, Pan-Africanism or perish. So based upon your analysis, and you at the beginning of our conversation today, you explaining the concept of foundational Black American or foundational African American, as well as your interpretation of it and your greater understanding of history and Pan-Africanism. You're saying that somebody can embrace being a foundational Black American and be a Pan-Africanist. Is that your argument?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I am 100% foundational African American, and I'm also 100% Pan-African.
Okay.
Or Nebu Africa. To be pro me doesn't mean I'm anti you.
Right.
I'm talking about legacy. People that come from the Caribbean, your legacy goes back to the Caribbean.
Right.
Even though American may be that dash American, whatever it may be, Jamaican American, Puerto Rican American, Dominican American, it doesn't make a difference. But still, as an African, if you are from Puerto Rico, Luis Aldea, and you got dreadlocks and you well melanated, you are an African American.
Right.
But your ancestry is going to be from the idea of Puerto Rico, but Spain is going to cut your check. And the other thing, brother, is there's many ways that reparations can come to us.
Mm-hmm.
When I say check, I'm really speaking symbolically.
Oh, okay. Because some people are not. Some people cut the check, and I'm like, you don't even understand. Race-based policies are illegal in the U.S. In the federal government. There's Title VI of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, Section 601, non-discrimination in federally assisted programs. So there's a whole lot of people, just putting this nonsense out about reparations to just elevate their social media platforms, even though you have people who are dedicated, have been in that movement for decades. You have others who are just, I call them reparations reactionaries or reparations pimps, and they're just lying to our people. But go ahead.
No, my idea, I wanted to stress that, because sometimes I speak symbolically when I say cut the check. We need some type of financial compensation, but also I'm looking at Black farmers.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
I'm looking at education. I'm looking at the HBCUs.
Yep.
I'm looking at after school programs. I grew up at a time when President Johnson instituted after school programs. I belong to a group called the Lincoln Square Neighborhood Center,
Right.
and every day after school you could go, and they they took you to canning factories. They took you to they took you to play baseball. They took you to the beach. During the summer there was a summer program, and so it was there that you had summer. You had tutorial. You had homework help. Where so that there are many ways that we can be compensated for what
Sure.
we have contributed to this country, and it becomes very important. I'd like to see farmers get their 40 acres. In fact, I want them to get 80 acres and 4 mules. I want them
Well,
to be able to get refrigerated cars where
mhm.
they can move their produce all around the country into our community. Because I work with a group called the Black Seed Brothers here in New York. They're on 139th Street and Malcolm X Boulevard. They have they have watermelons and fruit. That's where I get my watermelons from. They have seeded watermelons there, and they have relationships not only with the South but also during the winter months. They have relationships with parts of the African diaspora that grow watermelons, and they bring them up to Harlem and to parts of the Bronx. I'd like to see them get funds where they can begin to flourish in their businesses. And I
Right.
believe that black farmers would help tremendously, because if you help black farmers, you help children eat. You help our community eat. So there's a lot of different ways that we can do what we call reparations. The root word of reparations is
It's
repair.
repair. Exactly. Repair. So just so people understand, I've talked about this here on the African History Network show. I've talked about it on Roland Martin Unfiltered. For those that don't know, I'm a panelist on Roland Martin Unfiltered every Friday. I've been on pretty much every Friday since October 2020. So it'll be 5 years this October, and I provide historical and political analysis. There was $2.2 billion for uh, farmers of color in the Inflation Reduction Act that passed in, I think it was 2022 under the Biden-Harris administration, and that was to start dealing with the uh, race, the discrimination that farmers of color uh, had dealt with when it came to getting loans from the U.S. Department of Agriculture over the decades. So it was African American farmers, Latino farmers, Asian American, and Native American farmers. Okay, so they need more, but what they got, Republicans were against them getting that. Okay, so we have to understand this. Excuse me. And then we know there was supposed to be $5 billion in the American Rescue Plan for farmers of color. That got blocked because the federal government got sued by white farmers, saying that you're giving the black farmers and these farmers of color something that we didn't get. But apparently they forgot about the $26 billion in aid that white farmers got from the Trump administration. Okay, when Trump started his trade war with China over the soybean industry and destroyed the soybean industry. That was under the first Trump administration. They had to do a bailout of farmers. White farmers got almost $26 billion in aid from the federal government. African American farmers got 1/10 of that. They got $26 million. They got 1/10 of 1% of that. They got $26 million. So somehow, because I remember seeing clips of Senator Lindsey Graham from South Carolina on Fox News, and he was saying that the $5 billion that was going to, it wasn't all going to African American farmers. Part of it was going to them, but it was farmers of color. He was saying that was reparations. He called it racist, and he said if you're a black farmer, you get this. If you're a white farmer, you don't get anything. But you ain't deal with the decades of discrimination that was inflicted upon African American farmers, which is why you needed the $5 billion, why you needed the relief. Okay, you didn't talk about the $26 billion that white farmers got from the Trump administration, and we almost got locked out of that. So, one of the things that I point people to, and when I did my presentation for Kwanzaa, December 28th, 2023, okay, at King Solomon Baptist Church here in Detroit. One of the things I talked about was the California Reparations Task Force final report. They came out in June of 2023. And I read the 74-page executive summary. I didn't read the full 1,000-page report, but I'm familiar with the report, familiar with the history, because I reported on this for pretty much the 2 years that everything was transpiring. They laid out 12 harms that African Americans have suffered in California as well as across the United States. Okay, largely coming from the federal government. They laid out 12 harms and a history of that. They said there's more than 12 harms, but they were going to focus on those 12 and then provide remedies for them. They laid out 115 policy recommendations to repair the damage of the 12 harms, right? And what a lot of people don't understand, a lot of people, not you, but a lot of people will focus on the check, but not really understand the history of these laws and how they inflicted the harm, and realize that it's going to be policies that repair this damage. You're going to have to you're going to have to put these policies into place designed to repair the damage. And also those policies have value. Those policies will cost money as well. Okay. And that $2.2 billion that went to farmers of color, and some of that went to African-American farmers, that's part of it. And the other thing, you mentioned HBCUs. Under the Biden-Harris administration, HBCUs got $17 billion in funding from the federal government. That's a record amount of funding for a 4-year period. It wasn't 1 year, it was 4 years. That's a record amount for a 4-year period, $17 billion. So it's important for us to, as I explain to people, politics is the legal distribution of scarce wealth, power, and resources, and the writing of laws, statutes, ordinances, amendments, and treaties, their adoption, interpretation, and enforcement. So it's important for us to understand all this and connect policy, politics, to conditions, to needs, because this is all connected. We have to do a systems analysis, as Professor James Small and Dr. Linda Jeffries correctly teach us to do. We have to do a systems analysis of this. Okay, go ahead and comment if you want to. Then I want to move on to give people the information about your visit here to Detroit, and then we're going to start talking about Malcolm X.
The concept is, as we've been talking, as it relates to what we will receive, the United States government owes Africans whose ancestors worked on the plantations something. And there are so many different facets of pain. When you think about repairing, it's overwhelming. When you think of the psychological, the mental, the physical, the spiritual, and the soulful things that have happened to the African people, the financial aspect is only a part of it.
Right.
And even if, like you said, even if you did the financial piece, if the system is still in place, it means absolutely nothing. And again, as we segue into Malcolm, and we think about Martin Luther King, and we see what's happening today, although Martin Luther King was correct in what he wanted, Malcolm was more accurate, because it's about human rights. Because you can see when you do civil rights, they can take that back. They can lie, steal, and cheat and mess with the voter registration. Lie, steal, and cheat as it relates to the laws passed in education. But when you have human rights as a basis for it, and this is what our brother El-Haj Malik El-Shabazz was saying, which also it's important to understand that 9 years before Malcolm was going to bring the United States government before the UN, Paul Robeson was bringing the United States government in the early 50s.
Correct.
To the UN. And he charged genocide.
We charged genocide.
That was the name of it. We charged genocide.
Right.
And that's Paul Robeson. And I've seen him delivering the papers to the Secretary General, where he wanted a spot to talk about it. So that the point that we're making, brother, is that there's so much that needs repairing for us, for what they've done. Yet there's such a beauty in the celebration that we're still here.
Right.
And that you and I could sit up here on a Sunday evening on May 18th, the night before Malcolm's 100th birthday, and understand that there is a black mayor elected for Omaha,
Nebraska. Yep, John Ewing. Yes.
Okay, so that while there is reason and purpose behind our problems, it also becomes very important. I just gotta get my background in place. I'm getting excited now.
Yep, go ahead. It becomes very important.
It's also very important for us to understand that we celebrate who we are as a people.
Exactly. And
that we are here. It's very important to understand.
Right.
And that we have to celebrate, and we have to let our children see this.
Right.
Yeah, we've been through some stuff. But wow, what did it take for us to overcome that from the most fundamental level? I'm talking about our brothers and sisters on the plantation that knew that they were going to live on that plantation and that they were going to suffer that way. But they knew that if they just kept on keeping on, somebody would be free.
Right.
And we are the manifestation of their manifestations. And we have more work to do.
Right.
But we're not where we used to be, but we certainly aren't where we should be.
Right. Let me do this. I got to refresh the screen right quick because I'm not able to see the chat. So just give me a second here. Okay. All right. So we should be here. Let me try something here. Okay. Now I can see the chats. All right. Okay. All right. So now, once again, I want to let people know in Detroit, Professor Kaba Kamene is coming to the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History on Friday, May 23rd. The event starts at 6 p.m. and this is a 2-day celebration. The second day is at Al-Kibalan Village. So this is for African Liberation Day 2025. The African Liberation Day Committee put this together at Al-Kibalan Village. It's Friday, May 23rd, 6 p.m. I'm not sure the end time. Pan-Africanism or Perish, Dr. John Henry Clark, African Liberation Day. And then day 2 is at Saturday, May 24th at 7701 Harper Avenue, 7701 Harper Avenue, which is Al-Kibalan Village in Detroit. Okay. Pan-African food, diasporic DJ battle, political education, learning circles, African marketplace, etc. We'll get this up on our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. There'll be an open mic also. Now, Professor Kaba, you're going to be at both events, both Friday and Saturday. Am I correct?
Yes, I'll be there both days.
Okay, absolutely. All right, so visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, for more information. We'll get this up on our website. Okay, now, and then I want to see if I can bring this up also because my screen share wasn't working. That's why I had to refresh the screen. Let's see if I can show this because I talked about Malcolm X earlier, and we're going to talk about Malcolm right now. This is from Malcolm's speech, The Ballad of the Bullet, April 3rd, 1964, the one he delivered in Cleveland, Ohio, Coy Methodist Church. And I was saying he used the term African American. So this is from the book, Malcolm X Speech with prefatory notes by George Breitman. And Malcolm, in his speech, he says right now in this country, if you and I, 22 million African Americans, I have it highlighted in yellow, that's what we are, Africans who are in America. So Malcolm used the term African Americans as well. Okay, so we talk about Malcolm X, Al-Hajj Malik Al-Shabazz, born Malcolm Little, May 19th, 1925 in Omaha, Nebraska. Now, you taught classes on Malcolm. Was that at New Paltz?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
82 miles north of New York City.
Right. State University of New York at New Paltz. So I've studied Malcolm. I've taught about Malcolm, and I think Malcolm is very much misunderstood as well as Dr. King is very much misunderstood as well. And one of the books that really helped me learn a lot about Malcolm, besides the autobiography of Malcolm X, besides that one, is this one here by Dr. James H. Cone, Martin, Malcolm, and America: A Dream or a Nightmare. And Dr. James H. Cone is known as the father of Black liberation theology. And this book deals with how, toward the end of both of their lives, their ideologies were converging. And he's showing similarities between Malcolm's evolving ideology, because Malcolm's ideology is evolving, especially once he officially leaves the Nation of Islam, March 8th, 1964. And Dr. King's ideology is evolving also. And you talked about civil rights and human rights. And I want you to define that more if you can. But from 66 to 68, Dr. King transitions from civil rights to human rights. After the Civil Rights Act of 64, the Voting Rights Act of 65, Dr. King transitions to human rights, but he's also dealing with economics as well. The Poor People's Campaign, he's dealing with economics also. So what are, as we deal with this 100th anniversary of Malcolm's birth, what are some principles, what are some teachings you think that we need to understand about Malcolm and put into practice?
I taught a class on Malcolm 22 times.
Okay.
For 11 years, I taught a class on Malcolm.
Yes.
When I first got up to teaching, and I thank my daughter for getting me the job because she attended New Paltz.
Right.
They invited me to come up in February of 2004 to do a presentation on the Black Panther Party. And it was during winter break. It was in February of 2004. And we just had such a phenomenal time.
Okay.
The students and I. I got up there. And it was good because it was break. I didn't have to go to work the next day. So, I didn't leave campus till like 1:15 in the morning, because the students were just interacting with some of the things I was saying, and then I would have them speak to me about what they knew about the Black Panther Party. You brought, and it was the alphas that brought me up.
Okay.
I said, you brought me up to talk about Malcolm, but what do you know about it?
Right.
And there was a course on Malcolm X at the college. Long story short, we got along so well. They asked me, would I be interested in teaching? There was a teacher that was leaving the Black Studies department and going to the Department of Political Science. And they asked me if I would teach a class on Introduction to Africa. And so I said, sure. So I went up there in 2000, the fall of 2004, but by the fall term of 2005, the teacher that taught the Malcolm X class left.
Okay.
And so Dr. Margaret Wade Lewis, who was the chairperson, phenomenal, brilliant mind, asked me, would I be willing to take on this second course? I said, sure, Malcolm, that's a dream come true. And so I wrote up the syllabus, and she called me into her office and she said, well, I like where you're headed, but I want to tell you that the course is titled Malcolm X, the Man and His Times. Now, Brother Imhotep, and to the family that's listening, that became very important to me, because my approach towards Malcolm to teach students was a way to teach it. Okay. But when I looked in terms of the time, what I did was I got the book by Lerone Bennett.
Okay. Which one by Laurent Bennett? Which book?
The one that has that big calendar in the back.
Before the Mayflower?
Before the Mayflower.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Okay, and it has that calendar in the back.
Yeah, milestones in history. That's in the back. So this is the sixth edition. It's an
Okay.
old. It's my book is beat up. It's the sixth edition
Hey
before
man,
the Mayflower.
you've been pulling out these books as I'm talking. It's almost as if you premonitioned what I was going to talk about.
Before the Mayflower by Laurent Bennett Jr. Go ahead.
That's it. And so I went from 1925 to 1965.
Yeah.
And I pulled out American history. Then I got a book where I pulled out not just American history, but Black history. Okay, that's Black history, then American history, and then world history. And so what I did is I overlapped the history, world history, American history, Black American history.
Okay.
And when I began to look at that, I began to realize something that I just say in a basic statement. When a human being is born, he or she is born in the times that they're living. Their reaction to the times that they are living in is how they shape their times.
Okay.
And so that became very important to me because I began to realize that the first thing that I told my students, when I opened up teaching Malcolm X, I said, I want everybody to understand that when Denzel Washington was interviewed about the part that he played in Malcolm X with Spike Lee, the interviewer asked him, did you invoke the spirit of Malcolm X when you played the part? And Denzel Washington responded, no. I invoked the spirit that was in Malcolm into me. And that became very important as it related to my telling the students that each and every one of you is Malcolm X.
Okay.
And during the 15, because I taught evening class, during the 15 weeks of this class, one of the main things I want you to do is I want you to search within for the spirit of Malcolm that's within you. Because the spirit of Malcolm was in Harriet Tubman. The spirit of Malcolm was in all the other areas, all the other people that have fought for the liberation and emancipation of African people. You have that same spirit. But to do that, I have to focus on characteristics and principles. For instance, what do you talk to a student who some of their parents weren't alive in 1965?
Right.
What do you talk about? Okay, we showed the film Malcolm X by Spike Lee. They read the autobiography of Malcolm X. They read when the diary by Malcolm X by Sister Dr. Ilyasha Shabazz and Herb Boyd was written. That was the last year of my teaching a class, 2016. We included that. We showed different videos of Malcolm. A&E had a video on Malcolm. But what do you tell them as it relates to the spirit within? I'll talk about two basic classes that I had with them, where I talked about levels of intellectual growth.
Okay.
There are three types of intellect. There's the large intellect, there's the clear and concise intellect, and there's the ready intellect. The large intellect is when you have a lot of information. A clear and concise intellect is when you can transmit that information in a clear and concise manner in which the person you're speaking to understands exactly what you're talking about. And the ready intellect is when you ask a question, you can respond so quickly to it because your neurons are connected in a way. And I tell them that Malcolm had all three, because you can have one, maybe two, maybe three, but everybody don't have them all. I know people got large intellect, but they are not clear or concise at all.
Right.
You know, after you finish talking to them, you wonder, what did he say?
Right.
Okay. You can have a large intellect and a ready intellect, that when you're responding, you can respond quickly. You can have a large intellect and clear and concise, but you need time to think about it, so it's not ready. So you don't have to have all three, but when you have all three, you're brilliant. Malcolm had all three. And I gave them examples in the movies and in the documentaries and in the books that I showed them how his intellect was so large. And the thing about Malcolm was that Dr. Clark said that he had a like a cabinet. When he wanted political information, he went to Congressman Adam Clayton Powell,
right,
Jr. When he wanted history, he went to Dr. Ben or Dr. Clark.
Because Malcolm knew Dr. Ben, not just Dr. Clark. Malcolm knew Dr. Ben as well.
Ben. In fact, if you look at the documentary on Malcolm, you can see Dr. Ben leaving the funeral.
Which documentary on Malcolm? Make It Plain, or which one?
Well, I'm looking at the one that was on Like It Is.
Oh, Gil Noble's
with
show.
Gil Noble.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
But any of them has the same footage of Malcolm's funeral.
Right.
And Malcolm is leaving. Dr. Ben is leaving Malcolm's funeral.
Yeah, he was at Malcolm's. Yep, he was at Malcolm's funeral.
So it and Dr. John Henry Clark was one of the consultants on the writing of the Organization of Afro-American Unity. Dr. Clark was one of the ones that set up the charter for that. But the point I'm making is that Malcolm had large intellect because he had a cabinet of people that if he wanted information, health and nutrition, he knew somebody to go to. If he wanted something on politics, he knew who to go to. If he wanted something on education, he knew who to go to. So he had a large intellect. He had a very clear and concise intellect because he made it very simple.
Right.
And he made it simple because on his days on the street, he was able to make it simple because he hustled. And when you hustle, you got to hustle your stuff so that it's real plain and simple. So you can, his friend that he hung out with, he said Malcolm could talk money out of your pocket.
Right.
Up on Blue Hill Avenue in Boston. You
talking about Shorty Jarvis?
I'm talking about Shorty Jarvis.
Are you talking about Shorty Jarvis?
Yes, I'm talking about Shorty Jarvis.
Yeah.
He said Malcolm could talk money out your pocket. And then the ready intellect, when I saw Malcolm being interviewed by a reporter, and the reporter asked a question, Malcolm was so ready and so intellectually gifted. Malcolm could answer in that first response to that first question. He could answer the second question and the third question that he knew was going to be follow-up. When that happened, the reporter could not ask the second question. And that's when Malcolm would hit you with knowledge and wisdom that he wanted the Black community. He would shut the reporter down to give him at least 15 seconds, 20 seconds to say something. So he was ready. And he had a large intellect, a clear and concise intellect, and a large intellect. I wanted our students to understand that because I wanted them to understand, where is that in you? How large is your intellect? How clear and concise are you when you talk to people? What are the words that you use that are clear and concise? And how ready are you to respond to someone's question when they ask you that? How fired up, how ignited are your neurons in your brain that you can respond that way? The second thing that I did a class on that I felt was important for them to understand was that Malcolm was always uncomfortable when he was comfortable. And I use what's called the ZOD, the zone of development, where you're on a job and you're very comfortable in what you're doing. You can do it with your eyes closed. And you're very happy to do that. And at the end of work at 5 o'clock, you and your boys go out, you and your girls go out, go to a club for an hour or two, and then you go home. But there's a worker there that might hang around a little bit longer to do a little bit more work. They're very comfortable in what they're doing. And your supervisor is watching all of your workers. And all of a sudden, a job comes up that is not in that comfort level. and they pick you, who hangs around a little bit longer, when they offer you this particular responsibility, you're uncomfortable because you're out of your comfort zone. They're asking you to do something that you're not used to doing. But if you have the confidence that you're going to be able to do it, you apply that confidence in your uncomfort, and then that becomes comfortable for you. But you're still uncomfortable because now you're comfortable.
Right.
So now you want to move on. So what I'm saying is that in societies, there are always people that move up in society. They become the supervisors. They become the presidents or the people who are in charge because they are uncomfortable when they're comfortable. They don't want the okie doke. They don't want the 9 to 5. They want something more. That was Malcolm. Malcolm was uncomfortable when he was comfortable. And Al-Hajj Malik el-Shabazz was that type of mind that had the 3 intellects and that confidence in who he was, the self-esteem he had once he learned who he was as a black man in the Nation of Islam, that he realized that it was more than just religion. He realized that for black folk to get ahead in the country, he had to go to the next level.
And what was that?
That
next
was the
level?
ballot or the bullet.
The battle of the bullet.
That's when he became
time.
political. You see, from what my research is on the Nation of Islam and the Honorable Elijah Muhammad is that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad wanted the Nation of Islam to be a religious organization.
Right.
He didn't necessarily want it to be political.
Right.
But Malcolm, in his uncomfort, watching what was happening.
Watching what was happening to African Americans.
Yes. He realized that another part of the answer is not just a spiritual grounding, but it's a political wisdom.
Right. Yeah.
And so in the 2 speeches he gave at the end of his life, the ballot or the bullet was one, and message to the grassroots was the other. In those 2 speeches, if you observe what he's doing, you can see that he's breaking with the Nation of Islam.
Yeah.
And then when he goes international and he travels,
right,
he begins to see that there's a disease in America amongst people of European descent. And he realizes that people who he would never have associated with, when he went on the Hajj and when he traveled around the world, he began to realize everybody isn't quite the same. It ain't that he trusts them anymore. It's just that he realizes that the interactions between people on an international level is not poisoned and contaminated by the way in which America has been developed. So he becoming internationalized. And that's why when you read his diary, you know, I often wish that the diary had been published in the earlier part of my teaching his course, because that diary follows Malcolm when he's away, and the messages that he's writing, the letters that he's writing to Dr. Betty in terms of his travels and what he's doing and what he hopes to do when he gets back home, you can begin to see the growth of Malcolm. And you can see how he's taking it to the next level. And so what you see in El-Hajj Malik el-Shabazz, there should be a course on El-Hajj Malik Shabazz alone.
Okay. That transition.
Yes.
To
from Malcolm X to El-Hajj Malik el-Shabazz. And if you go to his diary, and you can get his diary, you know, you go to the Black Bookstore, go to Nandi's, I'm sure she has it or can get it.
Nandi's Knowledge Cafe in Highland Park, Michigan.
Absolutely. I'm sure she can get it. Read that book and you'll see the formulation. And, you know, I also assigned at the end Dr. Ilyasha Shabazz. I call her doctor because she works so hard. His daughter.
One of his daughters, yes.
Wrote a book, The Boy Who Would Grow Up to Become Malcolm X. And it's a children's book. And because I've taught children language arts, I've always really focused. And when I teach parents how to read to children, I always focus on the front cover and on the back cover. On the back cover, there is a picture of a butterfly in a circle. And one of the things I ask my students in elementary school, middle school, and also in college, I ask them, of all the pictures, of all the visuals that his daughter would put on the back cover, because on the front cover, there's a picture of a little boy looking up with the red hair, and he's just looking up. That's the picture, sitting on a porch probably, looking up. But on the back cover, there's the butterfly. And I asked them, of all the symbols, why would she pick a butterfly?
Right.
And that becomes important because I wanted my students, my college students in particular, because the ending project was for them to write their eulogy. Because, Manu Ampim developed those levels of Malcolm's life. He was born Malcolm Little, Detroit Red, Malcolm X, El Haj Malik El Shabazz. But then he transformed to the son who would come back.
Okay. Yeah, Professor Manu Ampim.
Professor Manu Ampim.
Yeah, he's a friend of mine as well. We've had Manu on the show also. We just had him on in February or March. February, I think it was, dealing with Dr. King. Yeah.
Okay.
Just had him on the show.
Absolutely. The fifth level would be the son who returned home.
The son who returned home.
Yeah.
Okay. You mentioned the Ballad of the Bullet. So everybody can check this out. This is from blackpast.org. Blackpast.org. They are a fantastic resource, fantastic website. They have about 6,000 pages of articles dealing with African American history and African history. This is Malcolm's speech from April 3rd, 1964 at Corey Methodist Church in Cleveland, Ohio, the Ballad of the Bullet. And as I was showing in here, Malcolm uses the term African American in the Battle of the Bullet. Right now in this country, if you and I, 22 million African Americans, that's what we are, Africans who are in America. But one of the, this is a very political speech that Malcolm is giving, okay? And when you look at, this was after he met Dr. King for the first and only time, which was March 26, 1964, at the debate over the Civil Rights Act of 1964, okay? And that took place when he met Malcolm, when he met Dr. King. That was late in the same month that Malcolm officially separated from the Nation of Islam, which was March 8, 1964. So a lot of people don't know about this discourse, and I want you to comment on it because you have taught 22 classes on Malcolm X. So there's a good article from the Washington Post that I reference in my lectures and in my classes. Martin Luther King Jr. met Malcolm X just once. The photo still haunts us with what was lost. This is from June 14, 2018. Excellent article by Deneen L. Brown for the Washington Post. So she shows this famous picture here. But one of the things that a lot of people don't know is that when Malcolm meets Dr. King, Malcolm tells Dr. King, I'm throwing myself into the heart of the civil rights struggle. I'm throwing myself into the heart of the civil rights struggle. And this was March 26, 1964. But going back to July of 63, okay, July of 63, Malcolm X sends a letter to the leading civil rights leaders at the time. And this is the month before the March on Washington. So it's the big six leaders, Dr. King, A. Philip Randolph, John Lewis, etc. Right? So he sends them a letter, and he's inviting them to Harlem for a meeting, and he says that we have to find a common solution to a common problem posed by a common enemy. Okay. The letter opened with "Dear Sir." Malcolm called for a united front against racial oppression in the country. Malcolm said the present racial crisis in this country carries within it powerful destructive ingredients that may soon erupt into an uncontrollable explosion. The seriousness of this situation, and I want to check and make sure people can see this. Let me increase the font size. The seriousness of this situation demands that immediate steps must be taken to solve this crucial problem by those who have genuine concern before the racial powder keg explodes. A united front involving all Negro factions, elements, and their leaders is absolutely necessary. So, and Malcolm warned that a racial explosion is more destructive than a nuclear explosion. He says if President John F. Kennedy can meet with Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev, then Negro leaders, he said it is a disgrace for Negro leaders not to be able to submerge our minor differences in order to seek a common solution to a common problem posed by a common enemy. Okay, talk about that, Brother Kaba.
When you look at it, that is the Pan-African statement.
Yes.
When you look at that, that is because remember, Malcolm's mother was from Grenada.
Correct.
Who went to stay with her uncle, first in New York, and then she went to Canada.
Mm-hmm.
That's where she met Earl Little.
Earl Little.
At the Marcus Garvey UNIA headquarters in Montreal. And then they moved south and eventually Omaha, Nebraska. And then Lansing, Michigan. So that right. What you have is Malcolm himself is a brother whose mother was from the Caribbean.
Correct.
And the way in which we interact, see, they have started this problem amongst us to keep us separated.
Correct.
This is not something that's inbred, because when you think about the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey, when you look at Booker T. Washington, Dr. Clark used to always say, again, that Booker T. Washington was one of the most misunderstood people in history.
Correct.
There's a book on Booker T. Washington that says he was one of the original Pan-Africanists.
Mm-hmm.
That's how Marcus Garvey came to America, because he wanted to create an institution like Tuskegee in Jamaica for his people.
And he wanted to work with Booker T. Washington, but he
yes.
came the year after. He came in 1916, the year after Booker T. Washington died in 1915.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so what he did was he just stayed and developed different concepts, and eventually you have the UNIA. And that was one of the greatest movements of the 20th century. So this war that we have amongst ourselves right now is a planned problem.
Correct.
And so what we have got to do, and as we come, and this is something that the brothers and sisters that are arranging this activity next Friday explained to me, and they gave me the demographics of Detroit in particular, Michigan in general, but Detroit in particular.
Right.
Where there are so many different groups of African people from around the world. And the strength and the numbers of the foundational African Americans. And that the conflicts that are occurring. And let me tell you, they're happening all over. So it's not just in one area. People that come here don't know history.
Yeah, I agree with that. And many African Americans don't know our history.
That is true.
Americans in general are ignorant of history.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's exactly right. And so I think education is one of the keys. And that is why in 2026, Haruna Set and I are going on tour, where I have accumulated all of my life's work. We have 12 books. 5 of them are going to be books that I wrote as it relates to who we are as an African people. 3 of them are going to be curriculum guides to teach our children their history and how to teach our history. 2 of them is going to be specifically children's books. And I want to teach our community how to read to children.
Okay.
And then 2 books are going to deal with what we're looking at, Black Panther. We're dealing with a concept of the Black Panther educational program. Okay. And we're honoring our brother, Professor Neely Fuller, by citing his 9 areas in his book on the workbook of white supremacy.
9 areas of human activity.
Yeah. Right. Countering, that concept. So he had 9 areas. Like I said, rel, sel, wep. But I'm adding 1. Now, he discussed the one but I feel that this one is very important to be part of the 9 areas. And that's health and nutrition.
Okay.
Because if your health and nutrition ain't right, them other 9 areas don't make a difference.
Absolutely.
You can be a phenomenal educator, but if your health ain't right, you a sick educator.
Right.
You can be one of the most phenomenal politicians that exists, but if your health ain't right, you a sick politician. So we got to get our health right. So health and nutrition is another area. And it is there that we call upon all the great nutritionists, such as living amongst us today, Queen Afua. I've been going to Dr. Sebi and his wife, Sister Ma'a, since 1988. We have Dr. Laila Africa.
Who's an ancestor now. Yeah, but his wife is, from my understanding, his wife is continuing the healing and the business. Because I knew Dr. Laila Africa, and I've met his wife a couple of times as well.
Yes, absolutely. So these are the 2 books that we have where we're going to work with young people as it relates to the Black Panther manual code, as it relates to what the Black Panther Party was attempting to do, because I believe that's very valuable, particularly for our young people.
Right.
And so I believe that my lane is education. I know a little bit about all the areas.
Okay.
But my lane, I ain't leaving. My lane is education. And so we want to talk about that when we come to Detroit also, as it relates to the work that we're doing. And it's just something that we have to look at. We just have to develop the work that you're doing with your classes and the work that you're doing with the African History Network.
Absolutely.
It becomes very important for people to be able to have the documentation. This is science. This ain't personal. And we have to get it. One of my books titled Carbon Before Melanin is the science of melanin. And when I used to go to Dr. Sebi, I invited him to come to my presentation that I was doing in Brooklyn on melanin. And he came. And then he left. And when I went back to the Herbal Institute a week later, he was there. And I said, Dr. Sebi, what did you think of my presentation? He said, well, it's very interesting. He said, but it was carbon before melanin. And that's what I named my book. And I dedicated the book to Dr. Sebi because when he said that to me, I did research on carbon. And then I understood why he said it was carbon before melanin. We talk about melanin, but melanin is a molecule. But what makes melanin the molecule is the carbon atom that connects like glue the nitrogen, the hydrogen, and the oxygen atom.
Okay, right.
Without carbon, there would be no melanin. And I've got a whole chapter just on carbon alone and what it is. There are 3 types of carbon. And so, this is the type of growth that we need to do so that when we talk about, I have a whole section on hair. What makes hair nappy, kinky, straight, wavy, curly? What makes it what it is?
Right.
It ain't about good hair and bad hair. It's about where you are in the presence of the sun and what the sun does to the hair follicle. It's a science.
Right.
Not personal. We don't talk about superiority or inferiority. We don't talk about good or bad. In science, you talk about the dominant gene and the recessive gene.
Yes, that's true.
And I have Punnett Square in the book where you can look at the dominant gene and the recessive gene. What role does the dominant, when you take a dominant gene and you mix it with a dominant gene, you get a dominant strain. When you take a dominant gene and mix it with a recessive strain, you get one that leans more towards the dominant, but it is still recessive. When you take a recessive gene and you blend it with a recessive gene, then you get a recessive entity. We teach it in school, but we teach it with plants. I teach it with humans.
Okay.
Because when you teach it with you, and it applies to humans as well as it does to animals, as well as it does to plants. But they don't teach you that. They teach it to you in relationship to colored plants and albino plants, the dominant plant and the recessive plant. But we got the whole thing set up for human beings. It's not superior or inferior, because I believe Dr. King was right. Malcolm was right. It is the content of your character that makes you who you are, and not the isms that create schisms.
Right. But at the same time, they were both trying to dismantle white supremacy and racism.
Absolutely.
At the same time, because you have...
Well, that's an oxymoron, man.
What?
White supremacy is an oxymoron. There's nothing supreme about white.
No, they're not supreme. They're not superior, but you have a concept that some white people think they are superior. And this system of racism comes from the ideology of white supremacy. Racism is a system of advantage and privilege distributed based upon race. Racism occurs when one race of people control the majority of the wealth, power, resources, benefits, privileges, land, access to opportunity, access to education, etc., and they use that to marginalize, subordinate, and do harm to another race of people. That's from the ideology of European white supremacy, and that's for the purpose of preserving genetic white survival.
That's it.
Which goes back to really understanding that history and connect this to the Moors. You see this developing as Spain is defeating the Moors, as Europeans are coming out of the Dark Ages in the late 1300s, going into the 1400s, etc. As they're coming out, as they start conquering people's land, when you have Columbus and his 4 voyages starting in 1492, you have Hernan Cortez conquering the Aztecs in Mexico in 1521. And as they're conquering people's lands, they are rebuilding Europe. Okay, Dr. Clark talks about how Europe was land poor, people poor, resource poor, and he, I know you've read Christopher Columbus and the African Holocaust, Slavery and the Rise of European Capitalism, and he talks about how coming out of the Dark Ages, Europe is rebuilding itself as is conquering people's lands, setting up plantations in the Caribbean, things of this nature. In Mexico, they're extracting the mineral wealth, the gold and silver, to rebuild Europe. But they saw throughout Europe, Europeans saw what happens when African Moors intermixed with Europeans. And they saw that when that child came out, usually it looked more like the Moor than it did the Europeans. And you throughout Europe, you see a change in the complexion of many Europeans, things like this, right? So then when they're going out setting up these different what are going to be colonies, etc., they start realizing they have to put policies in place. Otherwise, the white gene, Europeans are going to be wiped out. Okay, if they don't put policies in place to preserve genetic white survival. So this is what you're looking at. So a lot of people try to reduce racism down to hating people, not liking people. No, it's a power structure. Okay, it's a power structure coming out of that ideology in the need, they fear in the need to preserve genetic white survival.
And Dr. Francis Cress Welsing calls it genetic annihilation. But you see, it's happening as we speak, even right now. you know, with all this thing about immigration, all of
Yes.
this represents,
Yep.
you know, and again, I do a 4-part series. I have a webinar, 4-part series on the creation and the development of the Caucasoid,
Okay.
where we actually get into exactly what happened. You know, how did Africans morph into Europeans? How did the Grimaldi become the Cro-Magnon?
Okay.
How did Africans become Europeans or Eurasians? How did that happen?
Right.
And then from that concept, you have to deal with the fact that the reason why they exist was a mistake. And the mistake was leaving Africa.
Okay. Right.
And that's the story of the prodigal son in the Bible,
Mm-hmm.
when he returned back. So that the idea that was a mistake. They should never have gone north and got caught in the Ice Age.
The Worm Ice Age. Yeah.
The fourth Ice Age that we have recorded. And again, Louis Agassiz, Agazziz, who has documented the Ice Ages of North America and Europe and Asia. And so the idea is the fact that when they came, they went from being dominant to recessive.
Mm-hmm.
And right now, the immigration problem is the fact that Europe is dying out. There's a book called The Birth Dearth. Birth as in birth and Dearth by Ben J. Waddingberg. Read that. And they'll tell you what's happening as it relates to them dying out. This is why America now is offering people, particularly white women, $5,000.
Well, that's a proposal. They haven't started doing it.
Well,
it's a proposal,
But you see, even the proposal is a social structure.
Right, yeah. And they want that for white women to encourage
that's right.
White women to have white babies. Yeah, yeah.
That's
population
exactly what's going on. Now that's going on in Europe.
Mm-hmm.
Hungary is doing that. Hungary is paying their women to have babies, and they don't have to be married. Their numbers are dwindling.
Yep.
There's another book that you can read, Saving Your Skin by Barney Kennett, Kenet, and Patricia Lawler, Lawlor, that talks about the fact that there are large numbers of people who are dying of melanoma or skin cancer.
Mm-hmm.
President Joe Biden and his wife, Dr. Biden, they both have had a number of them removed since he's been in the White House.
Mm-hmm.
Bill Clinton had some.
Right. Melanoma,
skin cancer, but they're also dying out of drugs. Okay. Opioids amongst the elders and meth amongst the younger.
Right.
And then, of course, in melanin, they melanated reproductive systems in men. There is a activity, electricity in the tail of the spermatozoon, what's called the microtubulus, that allow the sperm, once released into a body's woman, to swim to the egg. And in women, melanin in the egg creates what is known as magnetism. So this is science now, electromagnetism. The electricity of the spermatozoon, which is singular for spermatozoa, that swims to the magnetism of the egg. So they melanated people in the reproductive system have an ongoing system where the sperm travels electrically and the egg magnetizes and draws the sperm to the egg. In a lack of melanin, the sperm don't have electricity or don't have enough electricity, and the egg don't have enough magnetism. And so therefore, there is a lack of reproduction. Not to mention, you know as well as I know, when you're a parent, okay, every child represents at least $500,000. At least half from the beginning, with all of the Pampers and all of the foods and all of the things and the schools and the clothing and, all of that is money.
Right.
And in the society we're living in, you may give them $5,000, but when you take away medical care, you're taking away money. So on the front level, superficially, you're paying me $5,000, but I'm losing about $500,000 when you take away all these rights and privileges like childcare and things like that.
Yeah, they're pro-birth. They're not pro-life.
No, they're not.
They're pro-birth, not pro-life. Yeah,
that's right. And see, this is what I call the superficial sapient. This is what happened in the ice. You became superficial in your thought process. You became very superficial. You became very shallow in your thought. Where there's, as Dr. Jake Carruthers teaches us, there's an African deep thought.
Right.
There's a consciousness that
Right.
goes deep.
So this was Dr. Jacob Carruthers' book he put out, one of them, African or American, a question of intellectual allegiance. So I got this when the ASCAC conference was here in Detroit in 95. I think
Okay.
it was about 1995. I got this March 19th, 1995. So I either got this at the ASCAC conference or I got it at the Shrine of the Black Madonna. But I was at the ASCAC conference when it was here in Detroit. Okay, so as we wrap up here, give people your information, your Cash App, your social media handles. How can they get in contact with you? How can they support you?
Family, I am about to go on tour.
Okay.
I'm going to do an Indiegogo or some type of fundraiser, because family, if we're going to do this, we have to do this. Okay, I understand there's a lot of ways to get money, but when you eat the king's meat, you got to dance to his tune.
Mm-hmm.
We have to do this on our own. And what I respectfully request is for our community to support our work.
Yes.
You can go to my website, www.kabakamene.com, KABAKAMENE, kabakamene.com, and you put your email in the slot, and you'll get a free e-course and a 44-page study guide for free, because I believe that those are things that the community needs. But there also, I have the list of my books that I've written, and it becomes important that we realize what it is that's going on. I have 11 books up now. I'm working on my 5th and final book that's going to complete the series. The book I'm writing now is called The Moors Before the Moors.
The Moors Before the Moors. Okay.
Yeah, because we have to understand certain things about the Moors, because that word is being thrown out a lot.
It sure is.
It even has a nickname called Yo Mo, what's up? In rap. But the Moors, we have to understand the name Moor, where it come from, who gave it to us, or did we give it to ourselves? This is the kind of conversation I want to have as we move forward, because family, I know some of us call ourselves Negro, some of us call us the N-word, some of us call us African American, Black American, some call us Moor. I don't care what you call yourself. If you want to be called a Moor, I'll call you a Moor. You want to be called African American, I'll call you African American. As long as you know I'm talking to you when I'm talking to you. Because if we can't get it together as to how we call ourselves, forget about everything else, going back to unity. My Instagram page is at Kaba Kamene, KABAKAMENE, which I use as my community bulletin board. If you go up there, you'll see that I'll be advertising my movement into Detroit next week. I use it as my community bulletin board, so that folk know, where I'll be, and the work that I'm doing and things like that.
Right.
I use it as my community bulletin board. So I offer my website, www.kabakamene.com. I also offer you my Instagram page, Kaba Kamene. My Cash App is $ Kaba Kamene 7, the number 7, Kaba Kamene 7. And also my Zelle is 646-457-0558. I'm at the point in my life now, family, that I now have got to do what I've been theorizing.
Right.
I hope to return back to Detroit. I'd like to have some type of relationship with Nandi's bookstore. I'd like to have a relationship with the Charles Wright. I'd like to have a relationship with the Alkebulan village to share my educational expertise. Like I said, I'm the spook who sat by the classroom door. I work for Sylvans. Okay, I know why they have success.
Sylvan's Learning Center is what you're referring
Sylvan's
to.
Learning Center. I work with Kaplans. I work with, when they figured out what I was doing, that was it. But I was studying them.
Right.
I was studying what they were doing and why they thought they had so much success with our children. I know how to organize those types of programs. And so, family, we have got to be able to do this ourselves. And so I am respectfully requesting the support of the community. And I know exactly what I want to do with the funds that I receive as it relates to putting the program together. I used to manage programs in the Board of Ed. It's called encumbering funds, which means that you account for every penny you're going to spend before they give you the money. Okay, you encumber the fund. And I think that one of the things sometimes that we may be challenged with is that we don't account to the community. If you're willing to support what I'm doing, I am accountable to you for how I'm using your funds. Mm-hmm. And I'll show you the receipts, be it airfare, be it lodging, car rental, the expenses that it takes, equipment that I might have to purchase in order to make my presentation to you more effective. I know how to do it. I've done it before, but I'm going to do it in a larger level now. And I'm going to dedicate at least the rest of my life to doing it, because after I finish this book, for me, I'm done writing books. Because I tell people, I don't write books because I'm a writer. I write books because I got something to say.
Right.
And so the 4 books that I have up now is William Leo Hansberry. Okay, if you're into African history and culture and you don't know who William Leo Hansberry is, you really don't know who set in motion the African Studies departments in accredited colleges in the United States. He started it at Howard University in 1922, going into 1923. Dr. Clark recommended that since I was a curriculum writer and staff developer, I should do my master's thesis on him. I did 2 master's theses, and I did both of them on him. One was in history, and one was in education supervision and administration. And both of my master's thesis was on him. And what I did was that I took both of my master's thesis and combined it into one. And that's the book that I dedicate my intellectual libation to the architect of America's African Studies program, Professor William Leo Hansberry, uncle to Lorraine Hansberry. Her father, Carl, and William Leo Hansberry were brothers. My second book is titled Spirituality Before Religions, because I wanted to get you ready for my third book, which is Shabaka Stone.
Right.
An African theory on the development and continuing development of the cosmic universe. That's quite a piece. And then my next book is Carbon Before Melanin, that deals with creators on Earth. It's a double entendre. Capital as it relates to creator is on Earth, okay? And then a plural, creators on Earth, which is you. You are the creator having a human experience.
Right. Yep. With God having a human experience.
That is it. And when you know that, then you understand all the other fundamental things that you have to do. Some people might consider it heretical to dare claim that you are the creator having a human experience, but every holy book says it. The creator created each of his creations in his image. Should be her image too.
Yeah, exactly.
But be that as it may, if that's true, when you look in a mirror, what are you looking at? You're looking at your image. But what is your image? Is you. So if the creator created us in his and her image, then that means that when the creator is looking at us, the creator is looking at the creator who is having a human experience.
Right.
It's very straightforward, very scientific, nothing heretical. And that's what our ancestors, when you look at spirituality, who is the parent of religions. Religions are the children of spirituality that came from Africa, that came from a universal mind. Because I know, like we say, an African-centered curriculum, but in honesty, there's no such thing as an African-centered curriculum. And going back to the sociological aspects of what it is that we're talking about, as it relates to white supremacy, that we know that white supremacy is a sociological construct. It doesn't exist, really. but it exists because something has happened, as you were explaining, that people have the fear of genetic annihilation, and therefore they create a sense of superiority as it relates to their physical characteristics, which makes them privileged and better than everybody else. And the more melanated you are, the more off you are, and the more closer to your European look, the closer you are. The same is true for the African-centered curriculum. When Africans were first teaching their children,
right,
when they were transmitting this information, they didn't call it an African-centered curriculum because the only people around were Africans.
correct.
The reason why I have to call it African-centered is because somebody stole our legacy, put their name on it. And so for us now to reclaim our legacy, we have to call it African-centered to go back to the original authors of the educational system of the world.
Right.
So family, I appreciate your support. For those of you who have supported me, and for those of you who haven't, I still thank you for coming on board, because the one thing that I've learned, my brother Imhotep, and to the family listening, when you search for the most precious thing that you have, the one thing I've come to realize is that the most precious thing you have is time. It's not money.
Yeah.
You can lose all your money and you can make more tomorrow.
Yeah.
You're going to have 8 houses. They all burn down. You can build another one. There will never be another May 18th, 2025.
Yeah. Time is money.
That's why we say pay attention.
Right.
Because that's a currency. Pay attention. Okay. It's a currency, your attention. The time that you've given up this evening to be here with us, I value that. And
yes.
I'm honored by your time. It is the greatest currency that you can give is time. Don't waste it. And
Absolutely.
Don't procrastinate. Procrastination is the thief of time. Do today what you should do. And as you move through this process, I've learned, as I've experienced, that some of my greatest strengths have at one time been my greatest weaknesses.
Right. And go ahead.
I was just going to say, when you find your weakness, you find your strength.
Right.
And that goes back to the concept of being uncomfortable when you're comfortable. Because to have to face your weakness and to own it, if you can own it and you can perfect it, it becomes a strength. And many times that strength is stronger than the strength you always had, because you learned it the hard way.
Absolutely. Also, those watching, if you want to support the African History Network, because all this does not happen without any resources, you can support us through Cash App, $ the AHN show. And when you go to it, it'll say Michael, it'll probably show my picture there. Or through PayPal, paypal.me/the AHN show. You can visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com or theAfricanHistoryNetwork.com, because I have our Cash App information and PayPal right there. And I show you a graphic and I show you our Cash App, because there have been some people who set up fake African History Network Cash App accounts who've been stealing money from us. So I had to create this graphic to so people know what our Cash App looks like. And we also have the flyer here for African Liberation Day here in Detroit, where Professor Kaba Kamene will be on Friday, May 23rd, Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History, 6 p.m. And then at Al-Kibalan Village, 7701 Harper Avenue in Detroit on Saturday, May 24th. So we have that information there. And then we have information about my online history classes as well. Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. We have our class lesson plan that you can download. But here we have our Cash App information and our link for Cash App here and link for PayPal also. Okay. All right. Well, look, Brother Kaba, it's always good to talk to you. It's been a while since we've had you here on the African History Network show. I saw you in 2022 when the Hapi tour was here in Detroit. Brother Taki Grant and Sister Felicia. So it's going to be good to see you again as well. So I'll be there this Friday at the Charles H. Wright Museum, front row, waiting to hear your presentation. All right. So peace to you and the family, brother. And thanks for coming on tonight.
Brother, I appreciate you. All power to the people.
Absolutely. It's not over till we win, as you
That's the
say.
bottom line. Keep on keeping on.
Right. Absolutely. All right, brother. Take care. Have a good night. Okay.
You also, brother. Regards to you and yours.
All right.
And to the family on board.
All right. Peace. Hotep.
Peace. Hotep.
All right, everybody. That was Professor Kaba Kamene. Be sure to follow me on my social media platforms, the African History Network on Facebook and Fanbase, and on Michael Imhotep, IMHOTEP, on Instagram and on YouTube. And when you go to our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, we have our Facebook and we have our social media handles there at the top of the page. Here in the thread of the broadcast, I'm also posting the information for Cash App and PayPal, because this helps us keep doing the research, stay on the air, keep broadcasting, pay for these services that I use. I just upgraded our webcam, so I had to buy that. I have a new Logitech webcam, so our broadcast is clearer. And when I was on Roland Martin Unfiltered on Friday, I could tell a big difference because it wasn't jittery as well. I'm using an external webcam from Logitech. It's a high definition 1080p webcam, so I could tell a big difference with this, but that wasn't free. Okay, so all right. Well, look, it's been a minute since we broadcasted live on Sunday nights, because I have a full work schedule and I work between 50 to 60 hours a week. I have been doing shorter videos, and I'm going to do a video dealing with the Nottoway plantation in White Castle, Louisiana, that burned down on Thursday, March 15th. We posted an article about it. We talked about it on Roland Martin Unfiltered when I was on Friday, May 15th, I should say, Thursday, May 15th. But when I was on Roland Martin Unfiltered on Friday, May 16th, 2025, we talked about it there. But I'm going to do a short video dealing with that. Check out the video that I did on May 5th, 2025 for Cinco de Mayo. And it deals with Cinco de Mayo and Afro-Mexican history and the Civil War, things like that. That's it on our YouTube channel and our Facebook fan page, the African History Network. All right, look, we have to get out of here. Remember, at the African History Network, we focus on educating, empowering, and inspiring people of African descent throughout the diaspora and around the world, because right now it's correct wrong behavior. It's not over till we win. Wakanda forever. We'll talk to you next.